This is One People, a documentary on British Jamaican culture and history, from oppression and suppression to fighting for freedoms. Those before me fought so that people could perform their cultural practices in peace, without the fear of facing opposition from others for something which constitutes a core component of every person's identity. This chapter begins with the story of my grandfather. He was born and raised in Jamaica and moved to Canada. After the Second World War, England found itself in a shortage of skilled labourers, workers and tradesmen. So, in 1948, British Parliament passed an act which granted people who were born in and lived in British colonies British nationality and citizenship. This meant that for people like my grandfather, they could travel to England and find work. The reason why so many people of the Windrush generation are Jamaican is because at the time of Britain passing the Act, Jamaica was in near economic crisis and struggling greatly, as there was a lack of jobs available. Many people saw this as an opportunity to not only earn money for themselves, but also for their families back at home in Jamaica. Despite not personally boarding the HMT Empire Windrush, my grandfather was still a part of the Windrush generation, as he travelled from Jamaica to England during the time that the Act was in effect. Upon his arrival to England, he, like many other Jamaicans, found it cold and hard. This was due to not only the weather being cold, also the people. It was exceptionally difficult for them to live in the UK, as racism was still a highly prevalent issue, and so was segregation. Places like public houses, where people could drink, socialise and find work, often had signs such as "No blacks, no dogs and no Irish" outside, so Jamaicans had to create establishments for themselves, such as the Black and White Cafe, or they could visit the very few pubs that allowed anyone and everyone to enter. This segregation meant that for the people of the Windrush generation, something which had only occurred during the slave trade was about to happen again. This was the formation of a new culture. During the slave trade, the slaves would share their cultural practices with each other, sometimes adopting the practices of other cultures into their own, until a unified culture had formed across the nation, and that culture was Jamaican culture. Due to segregation in the UK, people like my grandfather would seek pubs and establishments which allowed him to enter, to find work and socialise. The British, who didn't care for segregation and could see beyond race, were one of two parts in creating and forming British Jamaican culture. Because the British and Jamaicans would socialise together, social and cultural practices started to blend, as they did amongst the slaves when Jamaican culture formed. This resulted in British Jamaican culture beginning. It was in this very way that my grandfather and grandmother met. They met at a pub, got to know each other. My grandfather walked my grandmother home, and they would continue to see each other until their marriage. Despite their marriage being very taboo at the time, they proceeded to get married and have children together. Those children were my aunt and my mother. When looking at other aspects of their lives, not everything was as good. They faced racism, racist views and racial segregation on a daily basis. Despite people often having views and preconceptions that Jamaicans are angry and unruly people, the fact that it took almost 40 years for Jamaicans to make a stand against racism speaks volumes in and of itself about how patient, kind and tolerant Jamaicans really are. Another issue which many Jamaicans had to face was the lack of ingredients and food in the UK which they were used to. It took years for British Jamaicans to be able to afford to establish regular food imports, which they could then use to cook the food which they once knew and loved and had been without for so long. Jamaicans also had a major impact on the fashion of the counterculture movement. This movement was traditional skinheads, or hard mods. Despite skinheads factionalizing in later years, they started out a little before Jamaicans arrived in the UK. They would then go on to use elements of the fashion and attire which Jamaican rude boys often wore. The attire of a rude boy is typically a sharp suit, thin tie, and pork pie or trilby hat. A traditional skinhead can dress in the exact same way and still be classed as wearing skinhead attire. Finally, the most notable and influential part of Jamaican culture on the world is most likely the music. Jamaican music is typically seen as genres such as ska and reggae. However, these genres gave birth to what is one of the most popular genres in the world today, drum and bass. Drum and bass is a subgenre of electronic dance music and was created by not only British Jamaicans, but British Jamaicans from Bristol. If the Windrush generation hadn't brought their music and love for music with them, it's uncertain if many genres would exist today. This passion for music is so intense that my grandfather would often get his relatives to send him records from Jamaica to the UK, as he couldn't bear to wait months, if not years, for it to be released in the UK. This love for music was passed down from my grandfather to my mother.
Music, art, community, identity, yeah. British Jamaican culture, I would say it's a more diluted version of my dad's and aunties and uncles. It depends what the situation is, but on a whole I would say it's more diluted, obviously, because we're not in Jamaica, you know, and so there's a lot of English influence on all of us, because obviously we're here, not there, so yeah, I'd say it is slightly diluted, you know, less religious, definitely less religious, you know. Religion's a massive thing in Jamaican culture. It's not so much here. Obviously it is still a big part of most Jamaicans' life, you know, and British Jamaicans' life, but, you know, it's not so much you have to go to church on Sunday, so I'd say that. But then food is still very much a part of our culture, and the music is still, so yeah, I would say it's a slightly diluted version of what you would find in Jamaica. Okay. Scattered, very scattered. In Bristol, I don't know my other areas, obviously, because I'm from Bristol, but yeah, it used to be very inner city, very tight-knit community, you know, everybody knows each other. As you know, as my son, if I walk through the inner city, I normally see people that I know. Unfortunately, that area has become gentrified, and we've been pushed to all sides of Bristol, and so now we're scattered, and I personally do feel that, you know. The very few people that I have that are still in the inner city, I have to pay to park to see my friends and family, you know. I thought that was really wrong. And as I said, it's been gentrified, and so yeah, I feel that we've been pushed out, and our community spirit is in serious decline. Serious decline. You know, I used to be able to walk down the road and every other person I knew, you know, whereas now I can walk through Easton and probably only see one or two people that I know. Yeah, it's not nice. It's quite sad, really. You know, because it was a strong community, very strong community. We all knew each other, you know, and we've lost that, totally lost that, and that is down to gentrification. I had two lives. I had a life at home in the inner city, surrounded by people who looked like me, spoke like me, ate like me, listened to the same music as me. Parents had come over at the same time or thereabouts, you know. We all had the same struggles, and then I'd go to school and wow, what a completely different situation. The contrast was unbelievable. So yeah, I grew up with a lot of racism, obviously being a little brown girl in in a white school. Yeah, I got called all sorts of names. It taught me to look after myself, you know, because there's only so much that any human can take no matter their age, you know. So yeah, it taught me to think fast and yeah, react quickly. So yeah, I did have a lot of that, and I also found that the kids that I went to school with were very privileged compared to myself and my peers in the inner city. You know, like, they would go on skiing trips and things. Skiing trips, wow, you know, stuff like that. So yeah, it was difficult. You know, we were living in a poor area. Everybody I went to school with lived in, at that time, quite affluent areas, you know, and they had family holidays abroad and things like that. And I went, wow, you know, we just want to go to Jamaica. And it's not going to happen because we've got all these bills to pay. You know, and yeah, so the contrast was huge, massively huge. Hugely. It differs hugely. You know, it's everything that I feel is culture, so the art, the music, you know, the food, the community. Yeah, it's the respect for your elders, all of that's, you know, the Jamaican community, the British Jamaican community is hugely different to British culture. But I feel that a lot of British people are taking our culture. I would say it's easier for women than men, right, nowadays. I can walk into a bank and open a bank account. When my dad walked into a bank to open a bank account, so my mum went in first, obviously, being mixed race, my mum's white. She walked into the bank and they were like, oh wow, yeah, come in, yeah, we want to give you a bank account. And then my dad was parking the car. So when he walked into the bank, they then recoiled. I'm just like, sorry, but we can't give you a bank account. And so that was solely because he was black, even though, you know, he was Windrush generation. He was asked to come here. He came from a Commonwealth country, you know, had the same queen, all of this, you know. So I would say I can buy a house. Obviously, my dad did buy a house, but it was hard when they first came here. There was no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. You know, they all lived in bedsits because they couldn't find anywhere to live hardly. You know, it was really, really tough. And if you speak to your granddad's generation, they will all tell you, if you say to them, what was it like when you came here? The word that they all say is hard. You know, and you just think, wow, I've found it hard, and there are many people that look like me here now, you know, so I can't imagine what it would have been like when my dad first got here and when my family members first got here. I should imagine it was absolutely awful. Not much really, to be fair. Obviously we're more English, you know. I think culturally, not much, because we still, you know, as you know, when we're messing around or angry, patois comes flying out. So I don't think it differs that much, because the one thing that I can say is Jamaicans are very proud. They're very proud people, very proud of who they are, where they're from, and their culture and their traditions. So that's passed on, because yeah, it's just passed from generation to generation, I suppose. So, you know, it's like you live in a household. It's just that's the way you are, you know. Yeah, I think because of the discipline, because of the respect, the culture in your home is very much retained, as I should imagine it would be for anyone, you know, so yeah. Plenty and many. What hardships? The biggest one is people making assumptions about me, you know, assuming that my mother was a prostitute and my dad was a pimp. You could not be further away from the truth if you tried, you know, and thinking that I'm uneducated, again, you couldn't be further away from the truth if you tried. Thinking that I am angry. Why am I angry? What am I angry for? You know, I've actually had this said to me, so I've had people go, oh, I wouldn't want to upset you, and you know, these people have never seen me angry or upset. Well, why? How do you think I'm going to react? And I mean, these are people that I've, you know, parents that you went to school with their children. You know, now it's not as if you're going to start kicking off in a playground, is it? You know what I mean? So they'd never seen me upset or angry or annoyed or anything like that. They've just seen me stood in the playground picking my children up from school. Hello, love, have you had a nice day? Exactly the same as them, but then they turn around and say, oh, I wouldn't want to see you upset, or I wouldn't want to upset you. And you think, well, why? What do you think I would do? You know? So assuming that I'm an angry person, assuming that I'm uneducated, assuming that I'm a drug addict, assuming that I come from a family of drug addicts, you know, assuming all of these things, that's the hardships. And then the biggest hardship is breaking down people's perceptions. That's the biggest hardship, because everything else you can do. Yeah, it's going to be more difficult. Absolutely, as you know, I've said to you, son, you've got to work twice as hard as the next person, most likely, because of your culture, you know, so, but it just makes us better. It makes us better at what we do, you know. It made me a good engineer compared to my male white counterparts. I was much better, because I had to be. Because I had to earn that respect. I had to get them to change their perception that I wasn't some thick child of a prostitute, drug addict, blah blah blah, whatever their stereotypical concept of people of colour was. The silver lining is I'm going to be a lot better than the next person because I've got to do this, because I have to change these perceptions and still keep battling through it regardless. So yeah, you know, like I said, being followed in shops, people assuming that I'm going to steal something. I don't need to steal nothing. So why would you assume that just because somebody's skin's black that they're not intelligent? Why would you allow your mind to be so sharp? I find that really quite sad, really. And I hope, if nothing else, some people may see this video and free their minds a little more. The St. Paul's riots. My brother was there. Brothers were there. I wasn't allowed to go. I wanted to go, but they were a lot older, and so yeah, they were rioting because of the oppression, because of the police aggression and brutality, because of the hardship, because of the the poverty that we were made to live in through no faults of our own, and so it was an uprising from the local Jamaican mainly community against the treatment from the police.
Different organizations up and down the country that says they are helping black people, but that is not their aim. Their aim is every time we're oppressed to come along and immediately quell the problem until the next time come along. Well, we don't want that no more.
In 1980, April the 2nd, you have the St. Paul's riot, which, I mean, is an important event in Bristol generally. It's very important for the story about the Bristol Sound, because there's people who are on the records of the Bristol Sound who were there on that day. You tend to, remember the disturbances in Brixton and Birmingham and Wolverhampton and all the rest of it, but this was before that. They all came after. This is the first of the protest against Thatcher.
This afternoon we raided 5 premises in the St. Paul's area, home. We will not be there very long, hopefully. If there's no disorder, we will leave fairly quickly. If there is disorder, we shall have to stay there until it's sorted out.
It began on the ground in St. Paul's at 4:25. 140 police were spirited into the area in unmarked furniture vans. The first location to be raided was the Black and White Cafe in Grosvenor Road, the flashpoint for the riots in the area in 1980. 4 other places in St. Paul's were raided at the same time. Elsewhere in the city, 7 more premises as far away as Hartcliffe were also being searched by police. With the raids over and weapons, money and drugs seized, large numbers of police were still in the area, sealing it off. Serious trouble started. A large group of youngsters gathered on the ground opposite the Black and White Cafe. Fighting began when some tried to re-enter buildings that the police had already searched. As tension mounted, another 350 officers who had been waiting in nearby streets were ordered in. Police came under fire from bricks, staves and scaffolding joints. Police went on the offensive, trying to move youngsters away from the worst trouble. By now, 60 arrests had been made. By 6 o'clock, the police had regained control and the battling petered out, although a large and angry crowd still confronted the lines of police. The police began a slow and steady withdrawal from the area, but as the last of the police vans drove out of Grosvenor Road, the heavy stoning began again. Police had been warned that trouble was likely as darkness came on. Within minutes, the first of several petrol bombs had been hurled. But as quickly as that trouble began, it faded. With Grosvenor Road once again quiet, the trouble flared up in City Road. Police sealed off most roads, restricting even the locals to a few entrances to the main trouble area. From about 10 o'clock, although the atmosphere remained tense and the 600 police were still on duty, they experienced little obvious trouble. At least 3 journalists were attacked. one reporter from The Sun being taken to hospital unconscious. Another had his jaw broken after being hit with a baseball bat. Now arrests total 78. 13 people had been injured, 7 of them police, one of those taken to hospital with a broken leg. It was in the early hours of the morning that the situation had been defused enough for the police to withdraw from the area completely, though their senior officers said it was unlikely that anyone would be stood down until at least the end of the weekend.
Culture is just who you are. Like, what makes you, I guess. That's who I am. It's just that's what I know, I guess. Like I guess you're British, but I'm Jamaican. Fun. Yeah. Good vibes. I guess in loads of different ways, it's like just like small things, just like music, for example, like raised so many different types of music, food, proper seasoning. Yeah, like I don't know, like just like in so many different ways, just like I guess, like even down to like getting cast out. Do you know what I mean? Just yeah, like just a different understanding of myself to what they would have, because obviously they aren't British Jamaican, they're fully British, so yeah. British Jamaican culture, I'd say celebrations like festivals, like Simple's Festival. British Jamaican, you know, it's a celebration of all cultures, but yeah, British Jamaicans love festival. I'd say like even like down to like just the stereotype of being somebody that isn't white, like it does shape you. It shapes you differently to how it would a fully British person, because you are treated differently. For example, like the school that I went to was mostly British people, like fully British people, not mixed or anything. And so like my surname is White, and they'd be like, oh, like they'd refer to me as like black. So they'd be like, oh, Saf White, and they'd be like, oh no, Saf Black, and like I just laugh like just to go along with it, but like really I'm thinking I don't really see any like humour in that. It's like so many different ways, like you just be like pushed out because you're not the same and you don't fit in and you look different, and yeah, it's not very nice, but I see it as character building. I'm happy, yeah, I wouldn't change it. It's definitely made me who I am. Yeah. I'd say there's definitely a better understanding of being not fully British, but at the same time, racism, it can be more discreet, and you know, like somebody's not gonna like blatantly come up to you and just like be, I mean some people would, but most of the time like somebody's not gonna come up to you and be like completely racist, but there'll be other things, like somebody will say something like about your hair, or like anything, like literally anything, like you just, you know, it's hard to explain, but you just, if you know, you know. Yeah. Yeah, it's just, yeah, I'd say more discreet with racism, but at the same time more understanding, but then I guess that makes the discreet racism worse in a way, because you do understand what you're doing because you have been raised by it. Like, you've been raised in this country with multicultural people, so why are you still doing it? I don't know. But yeah. I'd say probably now, like, you'd see more people mixing. Like, so, like, my parents' generation, not many mixed race people, and obviously now there are. So yeah, I'd say, like, in my parents' generation there's probably less mixed race people than there are now. So yeah, it's just in terms of that understanding, and I feel like as well, like, in our generation we've got online platforms, so it does give that voice, and it also gives you a way to connect with other people that are going through the same things, similar things to you. Yeah, and, like, I'd say now, like, in my generation, racism isn't really tolerated. It's not tolerated, which is why people have to be more discreet about it. So yeah.
Well, thanks for letting me interview you. And that's the end.